The way we lead impacts the way people live. This world needs truly human leadership.
If you're a leader and you're in a reactive space and you're getting triggered by things, you don't even understand it, you're going to cause a lot of harm and a lot of suffering in the world. And that's really, I think, the root of most suffering in the world, whether it's political leaders or business leaders. These are unhealed people who are inflicting their own wounds, amplified 1,000 or 1,000,000 times onto other people because they have not worked on their own healing. They're carrying a wounded inner child. They've got all of these experiences. Even as adults, they've got wounds and traumas that they have not dealt with. And so I think the greatest responsibility we have for ourselves, for our families, our loved ones, and the people we lead is to work on our own healing.
I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Thanks for listening. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. You can find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, the app formerly known as Twitter, at Barry-Wehmiller, and find our podcast articles and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. Our friend Raj Sisodia is a name that should be quite familiar to anyone who's listened to our podcast. In addition to co-founding the Conscious Capitalism organization, which sprung from the book of the same name that he co-wrote with John Mackey, Raj is the author of books such as Firms of Endearment, The Healing Organization, and he was the co-author of Barry-Wehmiller CEO Bob Chapman's book, Everybody Matters. You can find out more about Raj and all the books he's written at his website, rajsisodia.com. In each of the books I just mentioned, Raj puts together a roadmap of how businesses can be a powerful force for good in the world through those stories of organizations and their leaders. However, in Raj's new book, he uses his own story to show others how to turn inward if they want to be an effective, empathetic, and truly human leader. This book is called Awaken, The Path to Purpose, Inner Peace, and Healing. It's an intensely personal work, but by sharing his own story and learned wisdom, Raj hopes that it will have a significant impact on others, leading them to lives of healing and purpose. On this podcast, Raj and I have a conversation about Awaken. We talk about the circumstances that inspired his turn inward, which then inspired the idea to write the book. But we also place it in the context of why the story he tells in Awaken is important for leaders. Raj and I also catch up on a few other topics, including the state of business education. Raj is one of many people who are working alongside Barry-Wehmiller to transform the way universities and business schools train leaders, and this is where we start our conversation with Raj Sisodia.
The startling statistic that I saw recently was that an estimated 70 million students graduate every year with either a business or economics or related major in college. So that's a lot of people that are being, in a way, indoctrinated into the old way of thinking for the most part. The old story of business, which is that it's only about profit and the bottom line and nothing else really matters ultimately. And that's a very narrow and damaging perspective, as we all know and believe. And so there's a lot of work to be done there. I would not say that we have gone very far so far. I think there's an awareness out there that the old way doesn't work, but people don't seem to have a good handle on what they should be doing. There's a lot of inertia in the system, especially in the more established business schools. In the US, for example, where you have a lot of tenured professors who control the curriculum and jealously guard the core curriculum so that they don't want to replace any of the existing content there because their departments are responsible for it. So it's a lot of things are kind of welded in place and very hard to change those. But that's the effort we have underway. I'm speaking next week to an audience of 500 business school deans and professors sponsored by the accreditation agency AACSB to talk about how they can use their leverage as the accreditation agency to really move business schools more rapidly in this direction. There's a sense of urgency about it. We cannot continue business as usual for much longer.
Raj, I was looking back, and the last time that we talked, 2019, when you and Michael Gelb had released the Healing Organization. Since 2019, there's been quite a few things happening in the world. Do you think that the events of the last 3 years have led to this urgency in doing something about leaders in business and how business views itself?
Yeah, I think so. I think certainly the pandemic has awakened a lot of people to the interconnection and the vulnerability that we all share, and the role and responsibility of business to protect the weakest out there and to make sure that we're able to survive these kinds of jolts, which there will be more in the future. Well, this was not the last or not the most severe pandemic that we will face. There will be more. And of course, we face the existing challenges of climate change, which is like its own pandemic, slow moving, but now becoming quite urgent. Uh, Income inequality around the world, which has been a big issue, that has also been growing in importance as we see the rise of populist movements and more unrest out there because people are really struggling. So yeah, I think this has accelerated the pressures and the trends that were already underway. So I do think, when they say a crisis is, it's an opportunity, right? Never waste. Let a good crisis go to waste. In other words, you can make significant changes in those times, which we saw many companies pivot quite rapidly as the pandemic hit, and they were able to change their ways of being and doing things. And I think we need to continue that. We need to continue. And now, of course, we're looking at AI and all of those kinds of things. There will always be big factors out there that cause us to shift. But all the more, I think we need to commit to this, putting the human at the center of business, as Bob Chapman now refers to it, the human revolution is really what we need alongside all of these other technological revolutions.
We've had, over the last few years, we had what was called the Great Resignation. That seems to have tapered off or not be as dramatic as it once was. From your experience, when you're out there talking, when you're talking to business leaders, when you're out there talking to even people in education, do you feel like business is really putting humans first or putting people first seriously, or is it something that they just have to do for the moment because because their recruiting is really hurting, or just something they need to do right now?
I think it's a combination. There are businesses that are purely doing this as a kind of a tactical response to a tighter labor market and more selective employees who were, had the opportunity, for some, not everybody, during the pandemic to take a step back and say, wow, is this really what I want to spend the rest of my life doing? This work, which is meaningless and there's no respect and dignity in it, there's no future in it, and so forth. And so, wages have gone up. Starting wages are much higher, I think, significantly higher in many cases for entry-level jobs, and additional benefits and things that used to be reserved for the higher levels within the companies, education benefits and things like that, are now being made available to more people. But again, some companies are doing that, as I said, as a tactical response, which means that when the dynamics of the market shift, they may abandon these things and go back to the old way. I think there are other companies that are more awakened companies that are actually seeing the reality of what happens when people are disengaged and disconnected. And on the other side, what happens when you actually do inspire people and connect and give them a sense of dignity and purpose, meaning in their work, the extraordinary difference that makes in the business. If you look at engagement, for example, it's only 20% worldwide. The last data I saw from Gallup, imagine 60, 70, 80, 90% engagement, what that looks like, right? And so recognizing the power of that ultimately every business runs on human energy, and that most people are only contributing a fraction of what they're capable of because of the existing way that we do things. And so when we change that, not only is it much better for the people, which should always be the driving factor, I believe, but also has significant business implications. So I think people are waking up to that. The importance of culture is something that is, now much more widely recognized. Having a conscious and caring culture, I think, much more than before. Culture used to be an afterthought. And I think more and more companies now are making it something that the CEO is directly involved in. And the chief people officers are becoming elevated in companies to play a more important role. And everything we've learned at Barry-Wehmiller in the last 15, 20 years about people and measuring success by the way we touch the lives of people, I think other companies are now waking up to that. But that is ultimately what matters. People have to be at the center of everything that we do.
It's funny because it was over the last few years, if you want to talk about the cause of the Great Resignation, it was almost a bottom-up thing where people were realizing their value or realizing they just didn't want to do things the way it had been done. Do you think that kind of spirit, do you think that companies can put that genie back in the bottle?
Some will try, I think, but I don't think you really can. And again, not everybody had that experience. Not everybody awoke, but there was a statistical trend in that direction. So I do think the trend is going to continue in that direction. I don't think you can reverse that. But I'm sure there are companies that are going to try to revert to the mentality that this is a cost that needs to be minimized by the human resources function. And there are going to be companies with lower consciousness that are going to try to do that. I think the good thing is that the marketplace will sort it out ultimately, that those companies will not be as successful and they will not grow as fast as the companies that actually do recognize that putting people at the center is the right thing to do, and it is the smart thing to do for business.
Speaking of purpose, which was one of the factors in people rethinking their careers and their jobs over the last few years, you have a new book, and it's a little bit different than the books that you've written in the past. There's an aspect of it that deals with purpose. Tell us a little bit about the book, what the impetus was to write it.
Yeah, so this book is very different. It's the first time, it's my 15th book, and the first time I've actually written about myself in it. I've been missing from all my own books. Many of my books did feature other leaders like Bob Chapman, and Everybody Matters, of course. That big part of Bob's life's journey was in there. John Mackey's story was woven throughout the Conscious Capitalism book, and I've written about many other leaders in the Healing Organization as well. But something happened 5 years ago, and that's when really the seeds for this book were planted. When I was writing the Healing Organization, and I was full steam ahead, I had set aside the entire summer for a series of writing retreats. My book was due October 5th of that year, 2018. And 4 women stopped me in my tracks, all friends of mine who I trusted and respected, and all said the same thing or some version of it. They said, "You're writing a book about healing, but what about your own healing?" And my first response was, "Well, I don't have time for that. I've got a book deadline coming up." And then I said, besides, I think I'm okay. I don't think I need any healing. But I said, first of all, you have to make time for that. It's important. Secondly, we do know your story. And yes, you need healing, like everybody needs healing. So you really cannot write a book about healing without working on your own healing. So I had the wisdom to listen to them, and I delayed that book by 5 months. I moved the submission deadline to February of 19. And then I took those 5 months and really invested in my own growth and evolution and awakening and healing. So I said yes to a number of experiences that I had turned down before, opportunities. So I had my 60th birthday up in the high Himalayas with a group that we organized these spiritual journeys called Shakti spiritual tours, based on my book Shakti Leadership, which is about the masculine and feminine. And so there was a trip being planned for the high Himalayas on the border of India and Tibet, which is the seat of the deepest Buddhist wisdom, which has a lot to say about suffering and about healing. And so I had great, profound experiences there. In that trip, I also went to a silent retreat in upstate New York for several days, about 35 other people in complete silence. And something happens when you're in complete silence. You get connected to your soul in a way, or your own higher self, or you get connected to some kind of source. But as I was walking around in nature with my journal, I just was receiving so much wisdom and so many downloads that I had 45 pages of notes by the time we ended that retreat. And the seeds of this new book were basically born there or planted there. I also worked with a coach for the first time that year, and she gave me some insights about my life and what my work had really been about. One of the things she said to me that I turned 60 that year, and she said, "You realize that you spent 45 years trying to impress your father. That never went anywhere, and now you've spent the last 15 years honoring your mother with your work. That's really been your life's calling." bringing your mother's energy into the world of business and leadership. And it was quite a startling insight from her because I had never thought of it in those terms. But as I reflected, I said, that's really true. Everything I'm doing here is a reflection of my mother's way of being and her energy. And, and so that became made conscious what was in a way unconscious before that. And then I also went to the Amazon rainforest with a group called the Pachamama Alliance and spent 10 days with the indigenous people of the rainforest, the Achuar and the Zapara, and learning a lot about our connection to nature, and we have experiencing a variety of healing modalities through them, tobacco ceremonies, dream interpretations, and also a plant journey, using ayahuasca. This is the brew that they've been using in the rainforest for 10,000 years, which really gives people access to a different state of consciousness through which they then realize many significant truths about life. It says it kind of as a grandmother energy, connects you to Mother Earth, that plant. And so I had many, many insights that came out through that. So all of this was a deep set of experiences that really helped me understand myself better, understand my life better, find some degree of inner peace. I had connected to my purpose years before, around 2005, when I was writing the book Forms of Endearment. And for the first time, I felt my heart open up in my work. And I was literally moved to tears as I was writing that book. And I knew that my purpose had just found me. It was about understanding and then spreading this story of business that is rooted in caring for people at the center. But I did not have inner peace, and I had all these wounds and traumas that I was carrying for all those years. And so this really was the impetus for me to start healing those wounds and traumas, and also achieving more a sense of peace with my life. And so, as I said, it all started in 2018 and culminated in this book that's called Awaken, The Path to Purpose, Inner Peace, and Healing. And it's really my life story interwoven with the insights that I've gained. What does that mean for all of us?
So in writing your life story and thinking about it relating to a broader audience, what is kind of your hope that if a leader or someone else would read this book, how they would relate to your story and actualize it in their lives?
So I think I'm touching upon universal themes in this book. That's one of the things I've always believed, as Carl Rogers said, that which is deeply personal is also completely universal. We all have unique life experiences, but also there's a set of typical human experiences and milestones that we all experience as well. So I think, these touchstones of purpose, of inner peace, of healing are all relevant for all of us. And I think everybody has to pay attention to those and figure out how to attain those. And so I share a great deal about the purpose journey, how it happened for me, how it can happen for others, why I was lacking inner peace and what I did to achieve that. And I think most significantly, the book really zeroes in on the fact that most of us are wounded and most of us have had trauma in our life. This is something that most people do not acknowledge. We've all heard of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, but we think that's limited for people who went to the military or were first responders or had other deeply traumatic kinds of experiences. But the fact is, all of us have traumatic experiences in our life. Life itself is hard, and things happen to every one of us. And so we're all living with some degree of post-traumatic stress injury, maybe not a diagnosed disorder. And just because something is common and widespread doesn't mean it's less significant. So this really, unless we acknowledge and become aware of it and work to heal it, it actually ends up running our life. We end up becoming reactive as opposed to creative in the world. And we do things and we don't often understand our own reactions. We have extreme reactions to things. We experience what is called an amygdala hijack when something happens. Why? Because it triggers some deep wound that you have inside you that you may not even be consciously aware of, and then causes you to react in a certain way, a disproportionate response in a certain way. And you can't even fully explain it. And that causes a lot of harm, especially if you're a leader, but really for everybody. If you're a leader and you're in a reactive space and you're getting triggered by things and you don't even understand it, you're going to cause a lot of harm and a lot of suffering in the world. And that's really, I think, the root of most suffering in the world, whether it's political leaders or business leaders. These are unhealed people who are inflicting their own wounds, amplified 1,000 or 1,000,000 times onto other people because they have not worked on their own healing. They're carrying a wounded inner child. They've got all of these experiences, even as adults, they've got wounds and traumas that they have not dealt with. And so I think the greatest responsibility we have for ourselves, for our families, our loved ones, and the people we lead is to work on our own healing. And that is a big, big journey, and it occupies a lot of this book. I had significant traumas. I talk about 4 kinds of trauma. There's personal trauma, things that happen to you directly. There's things that happen in your family, perhaps before you were born, but you didn't experience it directly, but you lived in the shadow of that trauma, and you were part of the energetic system that trauma resulted in. There's the ancestral trauma. This is interesting. The field of epigenetics, relatively new, is finding that things that happened 2, 3, 4, 5 generations ago in your lineage are actually still impacting how you show up in the world, because your gene expression is impacted by those experiences of your ancestors. And so you have irrational fears of certain things. Some people are afraid of dogs. Some people are afraid of tight spaces. They're claustrophobic. Very often you can trace that back to something that happened, some traumatic incident that happened, and that then caused that particular gene to be propagated through the generations, right? So becoming aware of these things. So how much trauma do you carry in your lineage? In my case, I carry a lot because I come from the so-called warrior class in India, the caste system. And my ancestors were at the forefront of many wars. India was invaded 200 times in its history. And my ancestors were at the forefront of trying to stave off those invasions and often usually getting killed or enslaved. And their wives and children committing mass suicide so that they did not become enslaved themselves. So that's a lot of trauma sitting in the lineage. And then there's collective trauma. The pandemic was a global trauma for billions of people. There's climate change, there's species extinction, there's many other things, Ukraine, even for some people, of course, a traumatic episode. So there's a lot of trauma, and we have to deal with it. Most people do not, and most leaders do not. Leaders think they're strong people and they can, drive their way through anything. But you have to actually open up. What we say, most people, when it comes to trauma, they hide it, they conceal it, and then they numb it, often with drugs or alcohol, and some people with, workaholism or, extreme sports or whatever it is. But those are still escape mechanisms. So they conceal it and they numb it, and then they continually relive it. That trauma never goes away. And there's a healthier way to deal with it, which is to reveal the trauma to yourself and to other people, talk about it and feel it, right? Reveal it and feel it and grieve it in order to heal it. That's really the journey that I have been on, and writing about my traumas in this book and going through these modalities. Like, there are many, many things available now to help people with these things, like the plant journeys and many other things as well. So I'm sharing all of that so that people can benefit. Everybody can learn from their own experience, but it's a hallmark of wisdom to be able to learn from other people's experience. And that's what I'm trying to do here. It took me 60 years to learn many of these lessons. And I think I'm also writing this for my own children, right? That they can learn these lessons at a younger age so that they don't have to go through the same kind of painful process, but still have the benefit of some of this hard-earned wisdom.
Raj, there are a couple of things that you said there that you have said so far. One of them was when you were talking about your friends coming to you and asking you to take care of yourself, and you said, well, I'm on deadline, I don't have time for that. And there was another thing you just said a little bit more recently where you were talking about kind of the masculine aspects of being a leader and leadership and powering through things or indulging in something to mask the trauma. Kind of thinking about your experience in getting over that hump to start dealing with it. How did you get over that hump to decide to deal with it? What sent you over the edge to say, you're right, I have to do this. I need to do this.
I was living my purpose. When I met all of you and got involved with Bob Chapman, I was very much purpose driven, right? That started in 2005 for me, and the conscious capitalism movement started in 2008. So I was living my life with a deep sense of purpose, but I had no inner peace. I was very unhappy on a personal level. I was pouring all my energy into my work, almost with a panicked sense of urgency. Writing book, even before one book was published, I was working on the next book, and I was traveling like 70, 80% of the time. And I was running away from something. And I really didn't know myself. And this is what I've distilled into these 7 steps now. So, I call it 7 steps to recovery of self. You have to know yourself. Who are you? What's your essence? Who's the real you, not the one that your father wanted you to be, or your culture, or your religion, or your profession? Who are you? What's your true nature? Know yourself, love yourself. That's a huge leap for many people, including me. They say 80, 90% of people on this planet do not love themselves. They kind of hate themselves. That was true for me for decades. Because to the extent I knew myself, I despised myself, because my father told me that everything that came naturally to me, all of my innate qualities, he framed them as weaknesses that I needed to overcome. He said, you're too trusting, you need to, don't trust anybody. You're too idealistic, you need to be pragmatic. You're too peace-loving, you need to be rough and tough. You're too in your head and intellectual, you need to be street smart. So I needed to be the opposite of everything I actually was. Right? So he made me aware of who I was, but also made me think that that was not okay. And so I went through life trying to be the opposite of who I was. And in the process, you end up, as I said, not respecting yourself, not loving yourself, in a way, despising yourself. And I think it came to the point maybe when my coach told me that you've been honoring your mother with your work. And this is why my work has had an impact, right? People have responded to it. Everything I was doing before that, which was really reflecting my father's energy, the dominant energy in the world, which is about winning and domination and competition and aggression. There's enough of that in the world. I was not making any difference. I was not adding anything. But this is my piece to add, right? And so this gave me a fresh understanding of really what my role was, right? To bring about in the world, bring about this kind of thing. So I think, so that's know yourself and love yourself and then be yourself. So I gave myself permission then not to reluctantly kind of bring in my mother energy, the feminine energy and so forth, but really to lean into it. Right? That this is not something to be just kind of apologetically introduced, but this is actually something significant. So know yourself, love yourself, be yourself. The 4th step is choose your life. Many of us go through life in a way being victims of our own life, because we say, why did this happen to me? Why was my father like this? Why was I born into this culture in this time? Why couldn't it have been like this? So you end up being a victim your whole life. But instead, if you can say, you know what, I choose it, even though I can't go back in the past and I can't change it, but I choose it. I choose to have that father. I choose to be born into that abusive, misogynistic, household and culture when I was young, because at one point I realized if I had not experienced the worst aspects of the masculine in my own family system, I would not have written a book about the feminine 55 years later, right? And likewise, if I had not experienced many other things would not have happened. So everything was a gift, even though it was painful and bitter at the time. Everything, and I haven't connected all of the dots, but looking back, I can connect most of them now. And things that I haven't connected yet, I'm sure I will make sense of at some point. That there's a gift in every experience, positive or negative. Right? So the insight that came to me as I was in that silent retreat, when it was mealtime and you could not communicate at all, they would just put food in your tray without asking you what you want or how much you want. And thought came to me that that's kind of a metaphor for life. Life is not a buffet. You cannot say, I'll have that father and this mother, and I'll have this kind of, upbringing and that religion or whatever. It's not, you can't order off of the menu. You're given a bunch of stuff. And this is, you need all of it. Some of it appears unappetizing and some of it tastes bitter, but it's what you need. This is your curriculum for this life. And so embrace it, accept it, choose it. So that was a really big one for me. And then express yourself in the world, right? Not only be comfortable in who you are, but now your job in this lifetime is to be that missionary, to bring that into the world, right? To go on that hero's journey, to go from being that caterpillar to that butterfly, right? Who's spreading light and beauty and also flourishing in the world. And that requires a painful evolutionary process, right? You have to grow into your own more potent self. So that's not easy. As I said, the cave that you fear to enter holds the treasures that you seek. So you have to confront your deepest fears. And you have to step out on your own. You have to let go of your mentors and other things. So that's express yourself, right? And then sixth step is become whole, which is consciously integrate your masculine and feminine. As Martin Luther King said, we must be tough-minded and tender-hearted. How can we become whole people? We end up becoming half a person at best, right? Because we suppress the other side. Men are capable of caring and being loving and gentle, and women are capable of being strong and decisive. But we often fall into those stereotypical roles, or even women get conditioned in a man's world to actually overdevelop their masculine and leave aside their feminine because they think it's a sign of weakness. The fact is that's what we need to become whole. So we have to embody the healthy aspects of both. And we go beyond that to say you also need to have the elder energy and the child energy. And I wrote about this in the Healing Organization as well, that you need to have the wisdom of the elder, of your own higher self, the meaning and purpose and transcendence and legacy. Those are that's elder energy. And then you have to have a healthy child energy. You have to be able to be playful, and laughter and humor and joy and creativity. These all come from child energy. Most of us have a wounded inner child. And as we grow older, we kind of shut down that child and we become very serious and grim. But then we can't be creative and we cannot experience joy. So the summary phrase we use is you have to become the wise fool of tough love. You have the wisdom of the elder, you've got the foolishness of the child, unashamed and unembarrassed. You've got the strength of the strong father and the unconditional love of the mother. Can you embody all of that in your own being? Unique in your own unique way. So that's step number 6. And step number 7 is heal yourself. And that's what we have been talking about, heal your wounds and traumas, but also heal your body. Most of us don't pay attention to our bodies. And, I spent last year 3 weeks in a healing retreat center in India, and then another 2 weeks in Costa Rica, just focusing on the health of my body. That becomes so important. It is always important, but you start recognizing how little attention we pay. We treat our body as just a way to carry our heads around. And so heal your body, and then heal your wounds and traumas. And so that's kind of the set of steps that I've offered. They are in this book, but I'm also writing another book explicitly with those steps.
Raj, you talked about curriculum just a second ago, which dovetails into one of the things that we started off talking about was your efforts to help transform business education. And throughout your body of work, you kind of have 2 different sets of curriculum that you're writing to help transform how businesses treat their people and how leaders lead. And, one part are these case studies of companies who are doing things in a different way with respect of people, putting people in the center. And then you also have this curriculum that you're writing, like with Shakti Leadership and with Awaken, on how leaders can transform themselves to be better to their people and be better leaders of people. How hard is it to get that part of your body of work into business education? How hard is it to get the part of transforming the leader themselves? How hard is it to get that into something that needs to be taught and needs to be said to leaders before they go out into the world and lead people?
Yeah, no, I think it is hard in business schools to introduce that into the required courses, right? The required core curriculum. Because, like I said, that's jealously guarded, and it's a lot of inertia. You can certainly introduce elective courses into the curriculum, and then the students self-select into those courses who are already kind of on that path, which is fine. But perhaps the people who would experience the most growth are not taking it because they don't want to go there, or they don't think they need it, but they need it more than anybody. Mm. So I think that's the challenge that we have in business schools. Most business schools are very much suffering from that issue. I think in executive education, we are offering these things. And again, of course, people are self selecting into them. So people who are already somewhat curious or on that journey of trying to elevate their consciousness are seeking these experiences. Um, but the hard boiled, financially oriented, numbers oriented, left brain, analytical, masculine energy dominated leaders are not. In fact, they would poo poo this. They would say, this is all touchy feely bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want anything to do with this. So I think that's always a challenge. I would say that the trend lines are positive. More people are open to more things over time. More women are coming in to leadership. So they're always generally more open to these kinds of things. And as we get the next generations, millennials and beyond, who are more purpose driven and more open as well, I think we will see an acceleration of that. But yeah, so far I think it's a bit of an uphill climb to get people to recognize the need for these things and then show up to change. Change is so hard for people. Many people would rather die than change.
Raj, one thing that you said that always stood out to me is when you were quoting a quote when you said many people die with their music still in them.
Yeah.
And that really resonates with me in thinking about your new book and talking about your new book. Could you kind of wrap us up today and talk about how finding your purpose, dealing with those traumas, your hope of detailing your own story can help others release that music that's within them?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of this. That every one of us has unique gifts that we came here bearing, that we are each holding a piece of the puzzle. It's like the world is a giant jigsaw puzzle, and every one of us has a piece. And if we don't show up with that, then there's something incomplete about the collective experience that we all have here. And so this is about giving people that courage and the realization that they do have a role to play here. And but more than that, giving them a pathway and how you can do that, I think is an important contribution of the book. And it's not only from a sense of duty, this is also the source of deepest fulfillment and happiness. I don't think Bob Chapman has ever been as fulfilled or as happy as he is today. With the kind of evangelical, and a zeal and energy that he has. He's tireless and he's filled with joy. And he brings everybody to tears every time he speaks, including himself. There's just such a deep bliss there that's going on. And the impact that he's having on the world and he will leave behind is incredible. And every one of us has that opportunity, really, to have that kind of an impact. So it's my greatest dream and wish for everybody, including my children, is that they get that opportunity, to express themselves. That you have to, in a way, phrase I heard today is, you have to chase the dream that has been chasing you all your life. There's something inside you. There's a little voice, right, that's trying to get you onto the path that you're meant to be. And at some point, you connect to that, and then you click in, and then you live into that dream. And that's very important. The world is as we dream it. And if everything that exists in the world that we look around existed in somebody's mind before it became manifested in the physical world. So we have to dream these beautiful dreams. And so this is about helping people dream those dreams that are what is meant for them, to do in this lifetime. That is to find their purpose, but then go beyond that, not stop there. That's not the end of the journey, right? You also have to then work on your healing your wounds and traumas. And with all of that will come a deep sense of peace. And then on your deathbed, you will have no regrets. One of the great and painful lessons I learned was with the passing of my parents. When my father died first and my mother died 4 months later. And my father, his passing was a big event. It was the death of the patriarch. It's kind of a momentous event. So it was a very solemn affair. But as I looked around, it struck me that nobody was crying. Nobody was crying at my father's funeral.
Mm.
Other than my mother, she was the only one in tears. His sisters, his own children, my sister, nobody was in tears. Now, 4 months later, my mother dies, and nobody could stop crying. The grief was overwhelming. And I just said, wow, here are two people who lived, 82 years each. And my father was a brilliant man, a gold medal winning scientist, a large personality, lots of personal power and charisma and drive and determination and so forth. But he did not come from love. And he really did not achieve his purpose in this life as well. He got derailed because of his own father. Basically, he had to give up on his own dreams. My mother, on the other hand, had pure unconditional love. That's what defined her. And that's what then led. But I said, what if you could combine the great personal power that my father had with the unconditional love of my mother? My father had personal power, but did not come from love. When I said, I want to marry somebody he didn't approve of, he cut me off for 5 years. He said, you're dead to me. I curse your marriage. I don't care about you. Right? My mother, there was nothing I could do to diminish her love for me. But she never stood in her personal power. Right? She never stood up to my father, for example, to prevent him from inflicting the kind of suffering that he did inflict on many people. So really, to me, ultimately, the gift of that is that how can we live in a way so that at the end of our lives, what do people feel? They feel gratitude that you were here and a deep grief that you're gone, as opposed to relief. And sometimes when people die and all people feel is relief. In the experience I had in the Amazon rainforest with the ayahuasca, the plant medicine that they've been using there, it was a very, very profound and deep sort of ceremonial experience that I had with that. And I experienced these beautiful visions all night long. And I had gone there to learn about healing. And I received so much that helped me understand healing. And then finally, the last message I got was saying, these are the 4 things that we need in order to heal. This is what the world needs, this is what business needs, and this is what each of us needs. And the 4 came as an acronym. It came as the list, LIST. And then L stood for love. And we need to operate always with love. Everything, single thing that we do must come from love. Not fear, not greed, not anger, not jealousy, not any of the other emotions. Everything should be rooted in love. Even the hardest thing that you have to do. Even if you have to let somebody go, right? Even if you have to let somebody die, can you do it with love? Because that's what it means to be human, right? There are many ways we can be hurtful, but there's only one way to heal, which is through love. The second was innocence. I for innocence, that we are all born innocent into this life. But then we get corrupted by the ways of the world. We learn how to use our incredible minds and intelligence to climb over each other, to win over each, to compete with each other. And we learn, in some cases, to lie and cheat to get what we want. We become corrupted. Now, we don't have a choice as a child. You're born innocent and then you get corrupted. You don't have a choice in either of those 2 things. But as an adult, you do have a choice. And the message I got was, we need a return. We need to live with innocence. What does that mean? That we do not knowingly cause harm or suffering to another life. Now, my mother was as innocent at the age of 82 when she died as she was when she was 2 years old. People have that, but we can all decide that we're going to live that way. That's what I'm trying to now think of my life in that way. The third was S for simplicity, that we make things too complicated. But the most essential things in life are simple. We have to always remember what really matters. Right? Keep the simple things in the front. And then the last is the truth. What is our commitment to the truth in the world? Truth seems to have lost all meaning, but truth is more fundamental even than peace, because without truth, there is no peace. That's why in South Africa, we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, so that the truth of what happened under apartheid could be acknowledged and apologized for and atoned for before you can move on with the reconciliation that they sought. So that was a message that came through me, the list. And I think it's a message for all of us. So my mantra going forward is, can I continue to work on healing myself? Can I try to live by the list? Can I try to embody personal power and the unconditional love that my parents showed me? Half of each of those pieces they showed me. And finally, can I be a peaceful warrior and a wounded healer? The most impactful healers are the ones that already suffered those wounds, right? And all of us, once we heal our wounds and traumas, we can become a source of healing for others. And I come from this warrior background, which I always rejected. But there is an important role for being a warrior. As long as you're a warrior for peace, for truth, for love, for justice, you're a peaceful warrior. And so those are some of the lessons I take away, and I think many of the readers will also resonate with.
Are you a leader who doesn't like to show weakness? Are you a leader that will just power through inner struggle to get things done, no matter the cost to your mental or physical health? Are you a leader that is constantly immersing yourself in your work to escape past or present trauma? None of those things are necessarily wrong, but they can't be good or sustainable. There's a lot to be learned from Raj Sisodia's book, Awaken, The Path to Purpose, Inner Peace, and Healing. You can find it at your local bookseller or Amazon. And you check out Raj's website, rajsisodia.com. And don't forget to find us and connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and the app formerly known as Twitter, at Barry-Wehmiller. And you can find more podcasts, articles, and videos at trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening.